So I appreciate the conversation we had last time because we expressed a lot of our issues around food, and nutrition is so interesting because it's not about just the biology of, in your intro class, nutrition. What is nutrition? It's a study of the ingestion, procuring of food, ingestion of food, digestion of food, functionality of nutrients and and all the things that includes nutrition. And that's a nutrition science piece, but nutrition is also diet and consuming food also dovetails with many other disciplines, right? So you can't think about nutrition without thinking about genetics and how we're all different, right? You can't think about nutrition without thinking about how we feel, how old we are. What are our environmental pressures? We talked back in pediatric obesity or child obesity about the socio-ecological model and how our body weight is influenced by so many factors. Well, so this is true of nutrition. This is one piece of this is psychology. And we are not trained in the undergraduate curriculum. We're not trained to be dietitians who can cure people with eating disorders. If you didn't hear that, let me say it again. In nutrition, we need to understand about eating disorders because eating disorders is of course about eating. Having said that, these disorders are psychological issues, and your training as an undergraduate does not make you an expert in eating disorders. However, if you want to build a career to help people with eating disorders, a degree in nutrition is a great thing. Becoming a registered dietitian is a great thing, but even a registered dietitian is not qualified to treat people with eating disorders in and of themselves because these are psychological disorders. So people that want to work with eating disorders, which is a noble cause, really need more education than just under the umbrella of nutrition. For example, one way to go about this, if this is your passion, get your degree, get your RD certification. Pretty soon it's going to require a master's, but you can get a master's in something besides nutrition if you want to. You can get a master's in social work or licensed professional counseling. There's different ways you can become a counselor. So if you become a counselor and a dietitian, then you have the potential to absolutely change people's lives and help them fight this horrible specter of eating disorders. So let me reiterate this. I have a PhD. I am a registered dietitian. I've been running dietetics programs and leading academia for three decades. I would absolutely not feel confident in counseling people with eating disorders without getting further education on how to work with people. We cover this in our program, but we're not experts. Does that make sense to everybody?
Yes.
So then you may go, well, why are we even talking about it if this isn't in our wheelhouse? Well, you talk about it because as a dietitian or somebody working with diets of people, you're going to encounter people with eating disorders. You may work for a school food service program at some point. You may, it depends on the size of the district where you live, but you may be in a position to encounter, in particular, young people that may be exhibiting signs of eating disorders. So you want to know enough about them so that you can identify, to the best of your knowledge, identify that may be a real eating disorder, and then figure out how to help people without trying to help them yourself without those further credentials. Does that make sense?
Yes.
I love the person that says yes. Thank you. You can always say no, you guys. Please don't just try to make me shut up or please me, because I want to make sure you get it. Okay. So let's get on this. So here, the title's Eating Disorders, and the subtitle's DSM-5 criteria. This lecture is based on what we know about the science of eating disorders. This is a book that describes how, what criteria define an eating disorder. So let me get going with this, okay? So what are eating disorders? We can have serious alterations in eating patterns, eating too much, restricting. You know, some people may eat 400 calories a day on a regular basis. Some people may eat 4,000 upon occasion. Purging. I think you're all familiar with these things, but there's lots of issues around eating disorders that affect our health. They're complex. They can be devastating and life-threatening, in particular anorexia nervosa, which we'll talk about. And they have a severe impact on our lives. And I guess I kind of want to like pull back to what we talked about last time, and that if we value among ourselves, if we value ourselves primarily by our physical appearance, then we may be missing the boat on something. And I'm going to stop right here because I want to do another share. See if I can do this fast enough to not be annoying. Well, that's a question. I want you guys to often to watch the videos that I assign, but I'm not sure it always happens. So, and I hope it does, but yeah. So I'm going to do a different share, and Kristen, it's on you if I get this wrong, okay? Let me know. So this is one of the videos we had here. Okay. Can you guys see this girl? Somebody?
Yes.
Thank you. Well, thank you so much. Okay, before I get started, does anybody have anything to say? I just wanted to like put this in perspective.
There was a thing in the comments with this being a case of body image issue. Why do you believe that there's an increase in overweight and obesity and not the opposite?
Yeah, man, I love that question because here's what we're faced with. Okay, one, we're faced with our own biology, right? So we like to eat. Animals like to eat. If you've ever had a dog or try to take care of a pet or something, the best thing that you can do for them is feed them. We're the same way. We love to be fed. And so, and look at the fast food industry. Not only do we love to be fed, but we really like stuff to be delicious. And not that fast food, in my mind, is delicious, but they have many ingredients and approaches that make their foods delicious, like high sodium content, lots of fat. You know, you think of a double cheeseburger with, if you're a meat eater, with, you know, extra cheese and whatnot. And so we're attracted to those things. And so we're bombarded. It's like the socio-ecological model for child obesity, right? Where kids, we want them to be healthy and have a healthy body weight, but everything around them is saying, eat, 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 you know, and here's video games. Why don't you sit and watch that? So adults are faced with the same thing. So, and so sometimes young adults or teenagers push back. They go, well, I don't want to be fat and I am judged. You look at all those commercials, I'm judged by my physique. So how do I control that? Well, I don't eat. And we all know that doesn't work. So, and actually not eating can be a predecessor for becoming obese. So it's complicated. Any comments on that?
I think also maybe like in the media, like that's whatever they're showing in ads is not the majority of people.
Say that again. You mean, let me see if I'm right on this. So these ads people see do not reflect reality of the human body. Is that what you're saying?
Yes.
Man, isn't that the truth? Right? 0.4% of people could be a model for an ad. Most of us are just regular. And then of course, if they're a model, they still get, brushed and photoshopped and whatever. So it's unrealistic goals, along with the ideal that physical perfection, whatever you figure it should be, is more important than anything else. And that physical perfection, as portrayed by the industry, is not attainable. And so if you have a goal to, let's say you're 130 pounds and 5 feet tall and you want to be 100 pounds, your body may never let you do that unless you starve yourself, because that's too low of a body weight. So you starve yourself and you get down there and you go, I feel good now. People are telling me I look good and all this kind of stuff. Then you're unhealthy, and after a while you can't keep doing that because you're too hungry. And so you're so hungry that you flip. And the literature shows us over and over and over again, these, massive weight loss attempts end up hurting people more than helping them. It's complicated, you guys. It's taken me many years of study to get my head around it. So let's talk a little more, and then please save up your questions and let's address them again, because I want to make sure I'm getting at what you think, not just what I thought of in putting this together. So let's get a little content here. What are eating disorders? Severe alterations in eating patterns, right? People can restrict or eat too much, binge eating, starving, throwing up. People do that. People that experience, kind of wild swings in their weight and so forth. They're complex and devastating, life-threatening, and affect everything about our lives. You're lucky if you've never been involved with an eating disorder, but I think I brought this up last time. Nutrition majors are a little bit, I'm not throwing a shadow on nutrition majors, but they're a little more likely than other majors to have experienced some issues with eating or issues with health. I have stomach upset, I've got celiac disease, I've got this. And so we are all attracted to majors at the beginning when we want to make a difference in the world about that. We want to learn more and we make a difference. Okay, so people with eating disorders sometimes migrate to nutrition. There's been research studies on that say that may be good, which is good, because then it's a right place to learn about about the appropriate balance. So this DSM-5, which I mentioned in the first slide, is a diagnostic and statistical manual of mental disorders. This is the Bible of psychological disorders. Whenever someone talks about, oh, they're anorexic or they have bulimia or they have this, if they're throwing comments out and they don't know about these diagnostic criteria, then they may very well just be making things up. Okay, so what we do by diagnostic criteria, if you are diagnosed with anorexia nervosa, you have certain characteristics. Same thing with binge eating disorder. So you can't just label somebody with an eating disorder without their meeting these criteria. So, and we do this so that public health is standardized and the diagnoses are standardized. And of course, this is going to affect, insurance and all that type of stuff too. Okay, so let's get into what are these categories according to the DSM-5, the categories of eating disorders, and see what's here and then notice some things aren't here. So at the end of the lecture, I'm going to go through these. At the end of the lecture, I'm going to talk about some stuff that's not really categorized in the DSM-5 that we're still familiar with. So we'll start with anorexia. Okay. I should have started with that first, but we have general things. So sorry. So some background here. Eating disorders begin early. Some girls, makes me sadder than anything. By age 6, we talked about this last time, they're already thinking about dieting. They may only eat salads because they see their girlfriends do it. Males and females are affected by the pressure for their certain body weight, but girls are hit a little harder with it. And if you look at that video we just looked at, where we feel like we're judged by all the things about our shape, especially a little girl showing up that way, and especially with the incidence of pediatric obesity in the community, or in the world at large. These girls may feel this need to be super thin, and see that on the magazines and on the billboards and whatever. And then they're faced with too much food, and everybody around them is overweight, because we all are. So what are they supposed to do with this? Especially if their parents don't have any idea to like couch this information and calm them down. And we'll talk about at the end, but what the goal of parents is to not focus on body weight, focus on eating for health, not weight, focus on being healthy. Do not personally criticize your own physique. And so there's a lot of role modeling that can go on for kids if parents know enough to do that. So they begin early, and don't blame people, because not everybody knows what you know. But look at the stats here. Elementary school kids are concerned about that. Normal weight teens already feel like they're too heavy, and on and on and on. And girls who diet frequently are 12 times more likely to binge than girls who don't diet. Think about that for a minute. It goes back to the original question. Why are so many kids overweight? And this is because when you restrict, you can't maintain it. I don't know if you've ever tried a diet. I'm sure you've heard from all of our lectures that diets don't work. And the reason they don't work is if you restrict the amount of calories you take in so much that it interferes with your physiology, you're going to rebound. Most people do. We can restrict calories and change our body weight, but it's that lifestyle change, right? That takes some work, and kids aren't set up for that and don't have any support. So what does etiology mean? Etiology means, how does this come about? What are the causes of eating disorders? And this is, everything we say is simplistic. And so this is a simplistic look at this. But in some cases, people have a genetic predisposition for an eating disorder. I grew up well before eating disorders were a theme. And I had a girlfriend in high school who focused on her weight all the time. And I was way too stupid for that and didn't even think about it. But she did. She focused on her weight all the time. Her mother had an eating disorder. So she had the genetics for there, but also the effect from her mother. It's not her mother's fault. She didn't know any better. Please don't consider any of this as pejorative. These are just the influences that can help, that can cause somebody to end up with an eating disorder. Then there's psychological: low self-esteem, need for self-control, unhealthy body image. I think how many of us feel that when we look at models. And there's the cultural. I'll show you some pictures in this in a minute, but you've seen them. Then the video we showed, everybody's like super thin and perfecto, and it's not how the human body is, and it's not attainable for most people. And at the same time, we have these ideals of being super thin, and then way too much food handed to us wherever we go. We don't go to restaurants now, but we have done that. You look at any list of the nutrient content of meals ordered at restaurants, and all of them are about twice what you should have for that meal. And if you're mindful and you're learned and you practice and you worry about your weight and you go through life that way, when you eat at a restaurant, which is a fine thing to do, that there's too much sodium, too much fat, too many calories. And so what do? You eat half of it, right? Or you share it with somebody. That's somebody that has all that education and the wherewithal to do it and doesn't have an eating disorder. But the people just the normal people running around that don't have the education you guys have, go to restaurants and they get a plate that may have 1,200 calories for dinner, and they eat it till they feel full. Now, if these are high fat, high calorie items, they're going to get full at around, and it depends on the person, but well past 400 or 500 calories that they may need for that meal. Any comments before I move on? I feel like I'm talking to vacuum. I want to make sure I'm not doing that. You guys are happy? Somebody say, yes, we're happy, Dr. Chriselle.
Yes, we're happy.
Yes.
I heard a yes. I'm going with that. Thank you. Okay, back to this body image stuff. Now, this is a few years old. So there was a period of time where, you know, we went for Kate Moss. We went for this ridiculous body type. But can you imagine being a normal human? Maybe you can because you were a girl. The females in here were girls when this stuff happened. Do you look at this? Do you think, can you see why a girl may look at this and wonder what's going on?
Yes.
All right, I won't make you guys talk anymore. I'll just keep running off of the mouth. Thank you feel free to interject. That would be cool because these are complex issues and I hope you at least have some thoughts about them. But you look at this and everybody here is starving. They're not undernourished, they're starving. And this is who showed up on the BMI in the 1920s, okay, around 22 in the 1920s, and in 2000s were 16.9, which is underweight. Okay, so this gets into DSM-5. This is where your test questions come in. I asked for the diagnostic criteria for these major eating disorders. So anorexia is one of them. So the criteria, this comes from the DSM-5. So remember to pull that through. That's a question that you will get, DSM-5. Okay, so if somebody's anorexic, they have to meet these 3 criteria: restrict intake, relative requirements, and leading to a low body weight based on their age, sex, and so forth. So they're too thin, they're not eating enough, and they're deliberately restricting the energy intake. That's 1. Don't eat too much. Eat too little. Eat too little. 2 and 10. This is a psychological piece here. All of these are psychological, but intense fear of gaining weight or becoming fat, even though underweight. So this type of image is really useful here. So here's this poor girl. So she's clearly underweight. She fits in the models of in the last couple slides, and you can see that she's wasted actually. You know, I can't begin to understand what anybody thinks about what a normal body should look like, but I think most of us realize that bones should not protrude. So what's going on here is her musculature is very small and she has almost no subcutaneous fat. So here she is, she's terrified of gaining weight, and then here's what she sees. Oh my goodness, I can't tell you how many people I've heard talk about this. They judge themselves in a negative way, like I'm too fat, I'm this, and this, and they're at risk for starving. So that's 2, restriction of energy intake, intense fear of gaining weight, and then a disturbance in the way in one's body shape is experienced, or undue influence of body weight or shape on self-evaluation. So I am fat, even though I'm not, or regardless of all of my accomplishments, my body weight's more important than that, right? So I may be, you know, deserving a Nobel Peace Prize. I'm overstating this, but man, I've always felt fat, you know. So this disorder takes over someone's psyche pretty much, and so it's not surprising that this type of disorder requires intensive care. So as a dietitian and as a colleague, because you may encounter some of your friends with these signs and symptoms, but as a dietitian, you're going to want to look for this. And especially if you work for schools, if you get involved in the school system, you work with younger girls, or then, and it's not always girls, men have this too. It's just they focus on women because they're more likely to have it. So significant weight loss, what do you look for? Somebody gets very thin. Food rituals. I actually had a friend in high school, the one that I talked about earlier. So I grew up in Seoul, Korea. I lived in a small community of people from all over the world that were in this particular school. And this is in the 1960s. So you can't imagine how far away that was. And eating disorders weren't on the radar ever. So for one thing, we didn't have social media, but also people had eating disorders, but we didn't get it from somebody else, right? It just happened. So my friend, her mother was very thin and worried about this. And so my friend, I remember 14 years old, I remember her, while we're sitting around just hanging out, her working out. she would get on the floor and start working out and does while we're talking. And so that's not a food ritual, but she also did those too. Her food rituals involved making cookies for people and never eating a single bite herself, or we didn't have like real milk there. We had powdered milk, is a long story, but she would make frothy milk concoction. So she would get skim milk powder and use we didn't have all this stuff you guys have now, but a blender, hand mixer to kind of beat it up and stuff like that and make it foamy. And that would be breakfast. So her rituals were making cookies for people, not eating them, making herself super low calorie shakes or whatever you call them, and eating those. And her entire focus was on weight. Okay, she was 14. This was in the late 1960s. I stay in touch with her. I didn't for a while, but then we've been back in touch. And she said she also went through several issues with cocaine addiction when she was a young adult too, which sometimes they don't always go together, but sometimes they do. So addictions to, having an eating disorder is a little bit of an addiction to a certain way of life. And I don't want to overstate this either, but sometimes there are concurrent occurrences of eating disorders. Okay, I didn't turn off my phone. That's stupid. Okay, so let's get.
There's a question in the comments on food rituals and not letting food touch. Is that a sign?
Not letting food touch?
Yeah.
I don't know. It depends on the person. Some little kids do this. I know we've talked about little kids so much, and they do that because, little kids are weird. It doesn't always mean that they're starting an eating disorder, but so it may be one symptom, but I certainly wouldn't call that a criterion. Okay, so other things, feeling of control when denying food. I had a student so many years ago. She's one of my favorite people ever, and she had an eating disorder. This is like, you guys, 20 years ago. She talked to me about her eating disorder and how she worked it out. And so she calculated how much she wanted to be healthy too, which is good for her. She calculated how many calories she could eat and still stay very thin. She was on a gymnastics team, and her body looked like that of a 10-year-old girl. So she really didn't have the sexual development that body fat is required for. And she talked about this control issue. And one of the things is she won awards on campus because she's brilliant. She had to go to a dinner with the dean and somebody else. And she came to me and she said, what am I supposed to do? They're going to ask me to order something or eat in front of them, and I can't do it. Those are the things. So she needed to be able to control food, but being in an environment like that was too hard for her. So let me give you so she would rather eat alone, and she did exercise compulsively, but let me give you a good story to this, a good ending to the story. She contacted me probably 2 or 3 years after she graduated, and we met in Austin for dinner, and she showed up, and I remember her having a little girl body, and she showed up and she said, look at me, I've got boobs. And so what she had done is she had joined the military, and they require that you maintain a certain body weight. And so she's still a runner. She's still pretty much an obsessive exerciser, but she came into a system that allowed her to stay healthy as possible. So she had all these symptoms, but she actually looked for a solution and found one, so people can find them. So other signs, people diet even when they're thin, can't sleep, feel cold. Layers of clothing maybe to hide their bodies or because they're cold. So lots of things. So adverse effects. This is such a big deal. So the reason we care, because death, this is the eating disorder that is most likely to result in death. But in the meantime, we have heart failure, issues with bones, teeth, and skin. People can actually lose their teeth if you're nutrient deficient. If you don't have vitamin C, you don't make collagen, you can't hold your teeth in. Okay, without oils, your skin gets very dry. Hair also, we can't keep producing the tissues that we need. So there's organ failure because the organs are small. So you saw the pictures before, and here's one. The muscles There's muscle loss or weakness. Now, you can look at this, and I think we can all agree that this person's body mass is too small for their skeleton. And the ideal situation for this person is a variety of things, but mostly adding more muscles and more support and more nutrients to provide what is needed. So again, organ failure, kidneys, thyroid hormones, people are cold all the time. If their thyroid hormones are low, you need iodine for thyroid. And if you don't have it, then you're cold. And then people become constipated and then they're miserable. And then when they're constipated, they feel full, even though they haven't had enough calories in a week or 2 weeks. The other issue here is iron deficiency anemia is a big deal. So people develop iron deficiency and then they lose energy. So then they can't do as much as they could. And then with the brain, okay, with low intake of thiamine, people can develop, just like alcoholics do, Wernicke's encephalopathy, which means their brain is, there's pathological issues with their brain. This is secondary to starvation, not to alcoholism, but it's the same thing. So that you can't make neurotransmitters if you don't have enough nutrients. So you know, a simple way to think about this is you need enough nutrients to make all your organs function. And the problem is the American diet is a full bunch of crap. So you eat that, and then your nutrient intake is, you know, it depends on how much crap you eat, and you know, but it may be substandard. If someone's restricting everything they eat, they're starving, and this is what happens with starvation. Before we started protecting human subjects, we had several studies involving what happens with starvation, and we realized that this happens. So high risk for death, again, my goodness, you know, this is an ideal physiology for people that are seeking that control. It's got the highest mortality rate, and that's all I got to say is it's an emergency. So related to this related to undereating is what's called a female athlete triad. And what this is a diagram that shows a relationship between disordered eating, decreased bone mineral density, and menstrual irregularity. So here's how this can happen. So let's say a girl is 15, and again, I'm focused on females because it's more common, but she's 15 years old. She may not have started her period. If she's been under eating all along, she may never have gotten enough body fat to get started with the menstrual cycle, or she started it, but she's watching what she eats. She's got disordered eating. So she's an athlete, right? She's on the runner, she's a runner, gymnastics, whatever. So she's not eating enough. So she's either dieting or exercising, and some people do a little bit of both. But what happens with her body composition being so low in fat, she's going to have lower estrogen in her body, and that's going to affect the entire menstrual cycle. And long story about this, eventually calcium absorption. So this can affect her menstrual cycle, so she becomes irregular. So one of the symptoms of someone with a female athlete triad is body weight, and then also loss of a menstrual cycle. Now, this used to be one of the criteria for anorexia nervosa, an eating disorder. They stopped using that as a criteria, and the reason is because some people take birth control that stops their menstrual cycle, and so that doesn't mean they have an eating disorder, right? And so it became complicated, and so they just stopped using the criteria. But if someone is not taking a drug that can affect the bleeding, and she has menstrual irregularity, it may be that she's in the midst of an eating disorder, and she's an example of the female athlete triad. So disordered eating, menstrual irregularity, and then finally decreased bone mineral density. So this is the problem. We talked about calcium last time and how important it is, but if you've got somebody that won't eat and has issues with eating so much that their body weight gets low, their body fat gets low, they lose their menstrual cycle. That's going to affect their bone mineral density. And this is so sad, you guys, because without being checked, people can, let's say a 21-year-old girl's been doing this since she's 15. She's a female. She's she's an adult. She started eating disorder stuff when she's 15. It may just take 2 years. And she has the bone mineral density of a 60-year-old woman. So the seriousness of starvation on bone health cannot be overstated. So besides death, also bone density. And there's some drugs now where people can take them and help augment their bone density, but they're not great. It's not the same thing. Any comments about the female athlete triad before I move on?
There wasn't one about the female athlete triad, but there was about just anorexia nervosa as a whole. If you notice signs and symptoms in a patient, anorexia nervosa with a client, what should you do as a dietitian?
Yeah, that's such a great question. So what you would want to do if you don't have that expertise, is you want to find in your community people that do, and you want to be able to refer people. So it depends on where you are. So you don't want to let them go. But you're not qualified to do it. But what you can do is you can refer them to somebody else, and you can still work with them yourself about the nutrition piece. But they need both. Now, some dietitians are also social workers or licensed professional counselors, so they can do both. But a person could also work with a nutritionist on eating healthfully, and then work with a psychologist or a social worker, whatever, to help them deal with the disorder. Depends on the community. It's a great question. Okay, so the next topic, this is another one of the well-known eating disorders. And I know you know this, I'm not going to spend as much time on this. I just want to make sure you're clear on the differences. So bulimia, and people know about bulimia because you think about throwing up, right? So here's the diagnostic criteria, and you will need to know for every one of these, the diagnostic criteria, so that you don't attribute bulimia to somebody who doesn't have it. And so you have a professional understanding about the label bulimia nervosa. So recurrent episodes of binge eating. And what does that mean? Eating a discrete amount of time, like 2 hours, a lot of food, lack of sense of control. So let me give you an example. Someone, and this is, it sounds like a stereotype, but it's just an example. Someone may think about bad foods, try not to eat them, buy them and store them, right? So I don't even know what you would think about a food that's out of your diet. Man, maybe a big box of cookies or some Haagen-Dazs ice cream or whatever appeals to someone. So they may deny this and then have a binge eating episode where they eat a whole lot of calories. Usually it's junk food. And I think it's usually junk food because we deny ourselves junk food, and because it's hard. If you're gonna, this sounds really silly, if you're gonna binge eat, probably spinach salad is not what you're gonna do. You would get full. If you ate whole foods, you wouldn't be able to eat way too much because you get full. It's the processed foods that allow you to overeat and that stimulate those taste buds and so forth. So one is recurrent episodes of binge eating, and then, and you've heard of this, recurrent compensatory behavior. A lot of times people throw up. So someone might go eat a whole lot and then go throw up. And people can be so good at it that they don't even have to put their finger down their throat anymore. They can overeat and just go in and just tell themselves to do that. And then it's not just once. So at least once a week for 3 months. So you have to have a pattern, not just a single occurrence. And self-evaluation is unduly influenced by how you look. So you are not your brain, what you contribute, your kindness, your relationship statuses. You are your body shape. And that's where this becomes such a disorder. And the last one is, this is not, sometimes people with anorexia eat more. And so if somebody has anorexia and then they eat too much after that, that's not a definition or a diagnosis of bulimia nervosa. It means they're kind of fluctuating. Okay, so how do you know now? I have heard from people that actually work with people with eating disorders and bulimia. they say sometimes these symptoms that we talk about are overstated and not so obvious. So people can have bulimia without having these overt symptoms, but people that have a very strong case have been experiencing it for a while, they have cracked lips, bite marks around their knuckles, and this would be, you know, as I mentioned earlier, some people can throw without putting their hand down their throat, so this wouldn't be the case, okay? But then the exercising can be an issue, and the tooth decay and staining. This, in theory, comes from vomiting. So you vomit the stomach contents, which can be acidic, and if you keep vomiting, then it's alkaline from the small intestine, and so that can help destroy the enamel. But if you see this, you should be of concern, but someone can have bulimia without having either of these symptoms. So why is it so bad? Dehydration, because people are throwing up. Electrolyte imbalance. So losing all those fluids can have a big effect, and that can cause organ failure. Also, in eating a whole lot, people can have inflammation in the esophagus. It can even rupture, and so can the stomach. So if someone eats too much and too fast, then they may be overwhelmed by what they're eating. It's not real common, but it can happen. So the esophagus can rupture and the stomach can rupture. And then these other issues with the bowels, you know, when people are eating not too much, and so forth, it's complicated. So lots of issues around health effects.
There was a question about, are there other compensatory behaviors other than purging?
Always, thank you. You know, it's a stereotypical bulimia. Let's go back to categories here, okay? Diagnostic. Oh. Yeah. Nope. A recurrent inappropriate compensatory behavior like purging. There can be more. Thank you so much. That's such a good comment, because people can also take laxatives. And anorexic people can do this too. And some of these eating disorders like bleed across each other, so they're not just cut and dried one or the other. But any way to try to compensate for what you ate. So purging, exercising too much, or people take laxatives. And the issue with laxatives is it doesn't work. The problem is by the time the waste products are in the colon or small intestine, if someone takes a laxative, it may move everything out faster, but the absorption, depending on where the absorption is probably pretty good by then, right? If the food's been in there long enough, you know about what happens across the duodenum and different parts of the small intestine, nutrients get absorbed. So people do that and they feel better because they feel thinner because they don't have any waste products in them, but it doesn't really affect their body weight. So it's a very good question. And I hope you get the idea this stuff's just complicated, right? Okay. So then there's binge eating disorder. And, you know, I don't want to overstate this, but I feel like our whole society sets people up for this. Same thing we talked about at the beginning. Even if you know what a healthy diet is and you want to do your best, and I think we all face this. We know a lot. We're still faced with too many calories, too many things in our environment, and too many tasty foods. And then there's this aura that we shouldn't eat them, and that makes us bad. And so there's self-judgment. It's really complicated. So binge eating disorder, here's the diagnostic criteria. Binge eating, just like with bulimia, same characteristics. Eating within a certain period of time, eating too much, feeling a lack of control. However, the episodes are associated with more rapidly and comfortably full, food when not feeling hungry, eating alone because they're embarrassed, and feeling disgusted with themselves. So these are some of the traits, but notice there's not compensatory behavior. So what we don't have here is someone that's also throwing up or you know, taking too many laxatives. I mean, and so having said that, these are the diagnostic criteria. As I've already said, they overlap. What's a test going to do? It's going to say which of the following is a diagnostic criteria for this condition. So you need to be able to know these. but also as a scholar of nutrition, you need to understand that some of these overlap. We'll talk about that too. So binge eating disorder is basically eating too much. Question?
Yes, there's a question in the comment. If someone doesn't show physical symptoms like with the teeth or bite marks, is there behavior patterns that people with eating disorders would show?
If you know someone well enough. Okay, so these are clinical conditions. You may not see them. We talked about this. But if you go to the bathroom and they're throwing up, so living in a dorm environment or with sharing space with young adults or even in family, this is something that's hard to hide. And one more thing about this, there's been some, if you guys are interested, there's some really nice books about, not nice, but books about people's experience with eating disorders that helps flesh this out a little bit, because I feel like this is such a superficial treatment. And, people that have eating disorders sometimes have control issues, or, there's several things that get them started. So, but anyway, back to this. Yeah, if you don't have these two symptoms, but they could also be throwing up, and you may know about that. But here's another thing. You can't tell by weight. With people with anorexia, usually part of the criteria is they're underweight. With bulimia, people's weight goes up and down, and often it's within normal limits. Usually with binge eating, because they're not purging, their body weight's going to be higher. Also, to be clear on binge eating disorder, they're not throwing up, as we talked about, and they don't have any of these other eating disorders. So, and I worked for a while. It's been a long time, but I worked at the university for a while. We had an eating disorders response team, and I was a nutrition person on it. And the doctors, still a university doctor, we had several of us. We had a psychologist and the university doctor, and then me, and we would meet with people. So I got some experience working with people just to give them free counseling on the nutrition piece of this. So people would come in and say, I'm triggered so much by what I do, what's in my environment. So I need to go get gas. I'd go into the store to pay for it, and there's muffins sitting there. All I can think about is the muffins. So that's so important. What do I do? These questions are, a lot of us can walk into a store and go, that muffins probably gross. But for people with eating disorders or binge eating disorder, the draw may be just hard to understand, and I begin with the plethora of tasty foods. I could certainly go into a gas station and pick out some candy and go, this is really fun. So sure, but binge eating disorders, like I can't deny myself, and that's all I can think about. So I learned that from people that was all they could think about. So why do we care? Well, this is, of course we care, but these are all the issues that you've seen forever. When you've talked about overweight in your other classes, the adverse health outcomes, and I can't emphasize this enough. I don't even know what these are, but okay. So I know what most of the stuff is: ramen, chips, some cheese, crap, right? So hamburgers, whatever. Highly processed foods. These are hot Cheetos. I just learned about this a few years ago. So anyway, these foods are killers. If we eat these foods and they comprise our diet, carbs, all this is going to do, and carbs aren't always bad. A regular meal with brown rice or something that is perfect, for your health. But when we snack on things that are primarily processed carbs, you know what the story is. Your blood sugar goes up, and then it goes back down, and your insulin goes up, and so it increases your risk for diabetes. And then your diabetes, you've got to, and then you continue to gain weight, and then the fat cells that make the diabetes worse, and on and on and on. But this stuff, if you enjoy it, if it's important to people, then they should have it every now and then. Say, every Friday I'm going to buy a bag of something and have that, so that it doesn't take on this mind of its own and this power that this is something I have to have. On the other hand, you can't have this be your regular diet because it'll kill you. is sadly, I can't even get this out right now, but sadly with the risk for COVID, all these years I've been teaching nutrition and talking about avoiding health disorders, avoiding these chronic diseases. And now we find out that the presence of these chronic diseases are what increases risk for people to die in this condition, in this disorder. So it's worth the day-to-day lifestyle choices to make this moderation instead of foundational. Okay, so back to the science of this. Besides those three, anorexia nervosa, bulimia nervosa, and binge eating disorder, there's some other like hodgepodge categories, which I referred to earlier. And so I'm not going to have you know all these. I just want you to know that there's a hodgepodge category. But atypical anorexia, so they mean almost everything, but not everything. So their weight may be normal, but they're still throwing up and stuff. And bulimia, they may not throw up in the right number of times. And binge eating disorder doesn't, not the exact criteria, but these are disordered eatings that are in those first three categories. And then purging, some people purge. And then also, this is so interesting, night eating syndrome. Some people recurrently eat at night, eating after waking from sleep, and they know what they're doing. It's not better explained by something else going on. It's just a habit of eating at night that's not because they're hungry. So this is not an eating disorder. And sorry, I don't like Gwyneth Paltrow that much because I don't like people that idealize their physique and act like they have answers to everything. But you may have heard of orthorexia. It's not on the DSM-5, but we still talk about it because it's out there, and maybe it'll show up in the DSM-6. But it has to do with healthier, righteous eating. So let's look at the signs and symptoms. Fixation on defining the right foods. A lot of energy on time and energy thinking about food. Tend to avoid eating out because you don't trust anybody else. And it can be so severely restrictive that it can morph in anorexia. This is something I come across a lot. Personal trainers, people I work with across the board, some of them have very strong feelings about, well, for dinner, I can have this and this, but I can't have cheese and I can't have any carbs and I can't have this, and I'm trying to eat a perfect diet. And, I don't mind that because I don't feel like judging anybody. I just feel like we can probably eat a healthful diet without being so restrictive. And the restriction may morph into anorexia. Any comments about this?
I like this subject a lot. And I've actually kind of teetered back and forth between dietetics and becoming a counselor. My husband works in drug and alcohol recovery, and I've worked in a detox center myself, and we both have a very crazy history when we were younger. And so, last class I spoke a little bit on my experience with doing a show and then the binge eating for a couple years after that. And so this is all super interesting because it's kind of like I could merge the two and I could, go this path. And this last slide I really like too. And I feel like overall it's the whole restriction is a huge part, like saying I can't have that begins like an obsession to want it. And anyway, so I'm just really enjoying your class.
Well, thank you so much, because you can make a difference here if you have this passion, and I know, I feel like when I'm talking about this, people sometimes want black and white, right? What are the rules? What are the diagnosis? What do you do? And this is just so much more complicated, but this is life, right? This is life, and people, the pressures that we have with advertising to look some perfect way are so hard. And we talked last time about, well, you got to look on Instagram, you got to figure out this, and everything is so beautiful, but regular people are just normal. right? They have their weight goes up and down, and they may look good one day. They may have really lucky to have, you know, whatever physical attribute we like, but most of us defining ourselves by physical appearance, especially our weight, and we're losing some of the most profound things that make it fun to be human. So, but thank you. I'm glad you're going to go into this field or considering it, because it's complicated. People need, you know, this whole relationship with food can be really complicated for people. So thank you. And people like this that have all the money in the world and personal trainers and a chef, shut up. You know, what the hell? Do you guys have this? You know, somebody that, I mean, it's just, it makes me so mad, and they make so much money on their little shtick. Okay, so then I want to talk about a couple other body issues, and these really aren't eating disorders, but you may come across them and go, wow, is this an eating disorder? And you probably know about this, but so just to put this in perspective, so there's body dysmorphic disorder. So you're more concerned about your appearance than you might need to be, preoccupied, to the extent that you're unhappy, and there's not another mental disorder involved. But and an example this week, you know, males have anorexia and bulimia. The incidence in females is much higher, like 10 to 1. Males have it too, but mental body dysmorphic disorder kind of goes across the board. And you know, I think men really feel this, well, I'm not muscular enough and I don't look good enough, and this thing about me is not okay. So that happens. And then here's muscle dysmorphia. So remember the picture I showed before with the girl that was very thin, looking at herself, seeing herself heavy in the mirror. So this guy, normal body weight, maybe fit, you know, extra muscular, he looks in the mirror, he's like, not good enough. So it gets to, and these aren't eating disorders, but they had to do with our feeling about our physique. So they're never satisfied. They feel like I'm not strong enough, I'm not muscular enough, I don't look good enough. And so some people devote their entire lives to developing that musculature. If they can do that in a healthy way and still enjoy the rest of their life, that's okay. It's when these things become more important than the regular life, and they remove the pleasure of existing. So my last comment on this is, last slide, I think I'm right. What do we do? Man, we're responsible for so much. And gosh, I think about parents right now at home with, you know, with COVID, with kids, with females that are trying to work, and families that are trying to work, and the kids are there and they're trying to teach them to, even when all that's not going on, just prior to COVID, look at the pressures that families have, right? So ideally, people have a partner to raise kids with. They don't always, but kids are always looking at you. When you're trying to raise them, you're spending maybe 20 to 30% of your energy making sure they're okay, because you're spending the rest of it keeping the house safe, making your money, taking care of the car, buying groceries, you know, all the things you do to run the lives. But your kids, they're pretty much looking at you and learning how to be. And so our feelings as parents and role models, if you're coach or whatever, our feelings about our physique can make a big difference to the eyes of kids. And so we need to be mindful about it. And what that means is, don't say those things that you know are triggering. You know, don't bargain with food with them, and don't make them think that candy's the best thing in the world. Don't punish them. You have to eat your broccoli. Do not criticize your own shape. And I know some outs of this, because, you know, I want to sound perfect, but I have gone through many years where I ran every day and I did all this, and a whole lot of it was about maintaining a healthy weight. But what I didn't do is get an eating disorder, but I still did a lot of exercise. I've always liked to eat, and never gone there, but nonetheless, some of my kids were like, you know, Mom, are you running every day? And so I'd take my son and I'd go for a run and bring him on his bike, and I said, I'm making my heart strong. You know, I'm running because I want to be strong. I want to be able to do things. I want to hike, and I still use that with people. I want fitness to enjoy my life, not to be thin. And it's a great tool to teach kids. So they're working on their muscles. Hey, eat this, it's good for your muscles, and let's go for a run. Let's go do something. So be critical of the media, because the media is just pretty awful. Advertising is going for the weaknesses in many cases. Don't criticize kids and their bodies. And I had a movie posted for you under pediatric obesity. And I usually show it in class, but we just don't have as much time here. But if you have time, take a look. It's the HBO Weight of a Nation, and it talks about kids and their body weights and how parents can work with kids to help them achieve a healthier body weight and avoiding crazy issues like eating disorders. Okay, so, and also I hope everybody feels this. The answer to happiness is not a certain size. The answer to happiness is complex. Being of certain dimensions may be important, may matter to you, but they're not the linchpin. You know, not everybody can maintain a certain weight. Some people are genetically predisposed to have heavier weight. We don't want them to be sad their whole lives. Right? There's so many things that we can do with that. So, and then with kids, let them eat. Calm down, let them eat. We've talked about a lot of these things before. Have healthy foods there, have treats every now and then. Don't romanticize treats, but also don't focus on this like, oh, you better not eat that or you'll get fat, because those things hurt. All right, so I'm done with my, except for resources, with my high horse. So I want to ask you if anybody has any questions. And next time we'll have our presentation with JD about AMS indexers. So get your videos done before then. And then we'll talk about the first section, older adults. But before that, we still have some time. Are there any questions? Comments?
This was something I saw in high school, unfortunately. It was like, I'd see a couple of girls like spit their food into napkins and throw it away. And then also on top of that, like smoking. Would that fall under like restrictive eating or like appetite suppression or both?
Yeah, I don't know how to actually categorize it, but I would call it disordered eating. You know, if you want to call it anorexia, they'd have to meet those criteria, but it sounds like disordered eating where they're on the verge, you know, and I would consider that a risky behavior. Thank you.
Just to make a comment on that, the bulimia with the napkin, that's usually like related to like they're heading to bulimia. Like that's like major sign when they eat food and they stuff it and they hide it in their napkin and like they want to throw away. That's like the major sign. There was like an episode on Full House like way long time ago that talked about it. That's the reason why I kind of know, and I did research on it afterwards. So yeah.
Thank you. No, that's right. I think it makes sense because we don't do that normally, right? I mean, I'm sure we've all spit out food before, but I've spit out stuff when I was younger because I couldn't chew it all because it was too weird or I hated it or something. But when you're chewing to try to eat without swallowing calories, that's what y'all are talking about. So good point.
I had a story I wanted to share. Like the fitness industry can be so frustrating. I went to a new gym and they kind of lined us up and on a bench, and me and my friend were there and this other girl. And then they asked us, they had like a clipboard with our name and they kept asking us, oh, what are your goals? Like, so what are your goals? And I was like, I just want to exercise. Like, and that wasn't a good enough answer. Like they were waiting for me to say like, lose 5 pounds, lose whatever, build X. And I was so frustrated because, you know, the lady next to me, she was like, oh, well, I want to lose weight. And she was made in front of us. Like that whole energy was so rubbed me the wrong way.
Man, I think I've experienced that too, going to a long time ago, being a personal trainer, and I was perfectly healthy weight. I was probably in my 40s, right? 45. So went in there and so she goes, what are your goals? And I want to be strong. And she goes, well, don't you want to look better? You know, like we had to write that down. I'm like, you know, I'm sure everybody wants to look better, but same thing. Wait, why aren't you obsessed about your looks, right? What's wrong with you?
I went through school to be a trainer. I got my associate's degree at ACC to be a trainer. And one of the ladies, they said, so I'm like moving. One of the ladies, they said, did the absolute best after graduating. She struggled with her weight all the time. And And because of that, she made a wonderful trainer. And then I also remember going into a gym, and this was about the time when I was really gaining confidence and having a normal body weight again after my show experience and everything. And I guess I just didn't have the mindset to do something like that. It just wasn't for me. But I remember going in there and I got a free training session. I just signed up. So I was like, sure, I'll take it just for fun. And the first thing the guy says to me is he automatically assumed my goals was to lose weight. And it made me so mad because that's him telling me like I don't look the way I should whenever I was just getting in a place of being comfortable with my weight again. And so I totally hear what you're saying there.
Yeah, and that's a great comment. And so one of the things I like to talk about this in class, and because we're not in person, I forgot to do it, but this lecture always comes right before Thanksgiving, right? So Thanksgiving is that obviously we may not see family this year, but typically what Thanksgiving is a situation where it can be glorious and also be stressful. And so family members feel entitled to comment on your weight and what you're eating, right? It can be your parents. It doesn't matter. Well, somebody well-meaning, somebody that's a jerk, or somebody who hasn't thought about it. But I wanted to say, and on the reverse, sometimes people go, wow, look at you. You've lost weight. You look spectacular. You know how horrible that is? You know why people lose weight sometimes? They can lose weight because they've been working out for a year and trying really hard, and that's a nice thing. They've medical. Or what that person is saying is, you didn't look that good before. And they could lose that weight because they've got cancer, they're depressed, right? They don't have enough money. Weight loss is always not this desirable goal that makes you happier. And I had this happen to me, and I got a divorce before I was 40, and my kids were little. I'm very lucky with my family, but those times were hard. And I remember this woman had owned a restaurant in San Marcos, this is Alabama, so y'all aren't born yet, but I got, the divorce is hard, and so you get. Eating was not my favorite thing to do. And so I lost weight. I saw her on the street and she goes, my goodness, look how great you look. You look so good. You were starting to look matronly. I'm sorry, I think it's funny now, but not at the time. But you were starting to look matronly. Like, that's bad because that's okay. If you have little kids, it's okay to look like a mother of children. But her comment was so derogatory about looking matronly, and then now you look thin. And I remember thinking, man, what a shitty thing to say to somebody. What if I have cancer? Or how about I'm not eating enough because I don't have enough money to eat right now, and I'm juggling, everything, and I'm trying to function. So my point here is, just don't comment on weight. Positive or negative. Don't talk about anybody's body weight. Don't do it with kids. Don't do it yourself. Don't do it with your mother. Now, I have a family member who's often saying, oh, I weigh too much. My husband's telling me I weigh too much. What am I going to do? Like, this conversation happens every time I'm on the phone, and I'm like, I don't want to talk about weight, in particular about women's weight, because women are the only ones that seem to hear this, where people just look at you and go, well, you just need to lose some weight. And I know it happens to men too, but we just have this pressure. And so don't give power to this. Don't give power. Somebody says you need to lose weight, just say, hey, whatever you would say to that. But just don't comment on people's bodies. Don't comment. We don't do it with children, not positive or negative. Now, I've had people argue with me about this and say, if I've been working out a lot, I like people to tell me that. Well, it's personal choice. But what you say to people may affect their feeling. Think of all those things with eating disorders and their feeling of self-worth and how they revolve around their size. So anyway, I'm done. I'm off on my high horse. I welcome any comments. We're out of time, but I'm here. So anybody?
I just I think earlier in this lecture you talked about how sometimes like a nutrition major or whatever, like we feel the pressure to stay like in shape and stuff. And like, I mean, I've definitely had that, like, oh, no one wants to listen to someone that's like overweight or whatever, which is like totally untrue because you can be healthy and like still have a different body type than the person next to you. Um, but some of my friends sometimes will like, they make comments, they'll see me like eat a cookie and they're like joking and they'll be like, oh, haha, like, look at the nutrition major, like eating unhealthy or something. And like, I eat dessert a couple times a week. I eat fast food and eat out. Like, I like try to have a balance of like everything. And so I just think it's kind of it's like a joke, but it's kind of like you were saying with like weight, like it still comes across like any comment on that is just not really appropriate, I guess.
Yeah, maybe you can use this to teach people because I've had that too with colleagues. I mentioned last time, people across campus going, well, the nutrition faculty should be thinner. And I'm like, who are you to say that? It's about anybody. And also, but it is normal. We have delicious foods in our world. Are you going to spend your whole life without eating candy or cake or pie if you like it? I don't want to because I'm pretty sure I'm going to die anyway. Okay, so I'm thinking of the balance. I want to eat good food, stay healthy, exercise, be able to do all the things I'm going to do, and then I want some chocolate. Right?
Yeah, definitely.
You're going to die anyway. What happens is when it becomes so restrictive that it gets this power, right? So I think the pattern is mostly healthy with some treats.
Yeah, me too. So
cool. So school them. All right, you guys are great. Y'all have a great week. I'm working on your papers all week. You'll hear from me soon about them. And I will see you Monday. Be sure to come because we've got JD talking about the AMS index and you're going to want to hear it. Thank you.
thank you.